The seas didn't belong to anybody except for this new little predator lying hidden beneath them.
For these veterans of World War II, this is more than their usual annual reunion. They're here to commemorate their shipmates of the 52 American submarines which did not return and remain, as they say, on eternal patrol.
I'm glad to see all of the survivors because we perpetuate the memory of those who are lost, and this is our biggest honor to do this.
USS Scorpion, sunk by enemy mines, all hands lost. USS Flyer, sunk by enemy mines, 78 men lost, 8 survivors.
Although only 2% of U.S. naval power, these submariners sank 1/3 of the Japanese Navy and 2/3 of their merchant marine, more than 5 million tons of shipping.
USS Amberjack, sunk by surface craft and aerial bombs, all hands lost.
Their dramatic achievement exemplifies the submarine's clear-cut victory as the most effective single weapon system in both world wars.
All hands lost.
At the same time, the sea is the tomb for more than 60,000 submariners of all nations, and many more of their victims.
Aerial bombs, all hands lost.
Submarine warfare has always been costly in human terms. Almost everyone who set foot in the human-powered Hunley was to perish on her 5 voyages. Nonetheless, during the American Civil War, the Hunley became the first submarine to sink another ship, though she sank herself in the process, with all hands lost. By 1904, submarining was still a risky business, but the development of John Holland's gasoline-driven boat at least improved the chances of resurfacing. When war broke out in 1914, the basic design of an effective diesel-electric submarine was established. But there was another problem to overcome.
Submarines were underhand, underwater, and damned un-English. That's an actual quote, by the way.
But the British learn the Germans are out, and the Grand Fleet, 151 strong, is running out to meet the day.
Although the most powerful navies in the world all had submarines, there was deep suspicion of them. If they were effective, as they promised to be, then what would happen to those mighty fleets that had won and held the great empires?
Holds the seas. It is a heritage, a tradition, manned by sturdy men. Admiral Jellicoe
Now,
commands...
the admirals realized this very clearly indeed, but they didn't like to put it like that, so there was a lot of cynicism, hypocrisy, double talk, pompousness, call it what you like. Submariners in wartime should be hanged as pirates.
If they were to be thought of as pirates, then pirates they would be. Submariners relished their notoriety and the disapproval of the admirals.
They looked right down upon these stinking little submergibles that had suddenly arrived in the fleet and were now slowly crawling their way past them. They looked down upon officers who were now going down into the engine rooms of these horrible, oily craft and getting their hands dirty. And of course, they should have been wearing white gloves. So the whole idea of submarining really was no occupation for a gentleman. And it was finished off by one lovely description, I think, by an admiral. By God, they looked just like unwashed chauffeurs.
To be in submarines in the Royal Navy marked you as socially inferior, a mere tradesman.
They bear in place of classic names, letters and numbers on their skin. They play their grisly blindfold games in little boxes made of tin. Sometimes they stalk the Zeppelin. Sometimes they learn where mines are laid or where the Baltic ice is thin. That is the custom of the trade. Rudyard Kipling.
But in September 1914, the submarine was about to make its mark.
Shortly after war was declared, a little tiny submarine, obsolete even for the time, U-9, under Captain-Lieutenant Otto Weddigen, crept down the Dutch coast, where he found 3 British cruisers parading up and down in stately line ahead. Perfect station keeping, of course, as you'd expect from the British fleet. He came up, and with 3 torpedoes, in less than 1 hour, he sank the lot. And what made it so dastardly was it was before breakfast.
U-9 had proved Britannia might rule the waves, but not necessarily what lay beneath them. The submarine had arrived as a weapon of war, and its behavior was to become even more ungentlemanly.
When war broke out in August 1914, it was assumed that the submarine would be just like another warship, and it would only wage war on the enemy's navies, and it would leave merchant ships alone.
War at sea was supposed to be a courteous affair. By the international rules known as the prize regulations, the sinking of unarmed cargo vessels was forbidden. If a ship was found to be carrying war goods, then it could be sunk or captured as a prize and its crew taken prisoner. But the submarine was simply not designed to play by these rules.
By early 1915, it was quite clear that the submarine was different. It relied on stealth to survive, therefore it dared not linger in the vicinity of a sinking. And so you have this terrible paradox. Ordinary young submarine commanders are not particularly wicked people, with no orders from above to be ruthless, were committing the gravest sin of all, committing fellow mariners to the sea and leaving them to drown. So I think right from day one, the nature of the submarine dictated that it had to be successful, it had to be used ruthlessly.
If the sinking of merchant ships was considered unsporting, worse was yet to come.
Travelers intending to embark on Atlantic voyages are reminded that in accordance with a formal notice given by the Imperial German government, vessels flying the flag of Great Britain or any of her allies are liable to destruction in those waters, and that travelers sailing in the war zone do so at their own risk.
Published in the newspapers, the warnings of the Imperial German Embassy were ignored as the luxury passenger liner Lusitania departed on what was to be her last voyage. The sinking stunned the world. German claims that the liner was carrying munitions were ignored. As the wreckage washed ashore, America denounced the tragedy as piracy on a vaster scale than any old-time pirate ever practiced. Almost 1,200 people perished. The image of the submarine as a ruthless predator was confirmed. From now on, there would be only 2 kinds of ships, submarines and targets. submarines proceeded to wreak havoc on the merchant fleets of both sides, bringing Britain and Germany to the edge of starvation and America into the war. Maritime warfare was redefined. The assumptions of the past were swept aside, driven like the sailing ship to extinction. The submarine had found its true purpose. The underwater pirate was emerging as a new kind of hero, a warrior, exposed to constant danger, fighting alone in dark waters and under impossible conditions. The submarine systems were designed purely to support its tactical operations, not the comfort of the crew. You slept alongside the torpedoes until you fired them at the enemy.
On the surface, you'd be rocking and rolling so that you'd have to wedge yourself all like this all the time. If you were changing depth, you might well have to hang on to something like this while the angle came on the boat. No real comfort in the bunks because you were turning in fully clothed, and furthermore, when you turned out of your bunk to relieve somebody, the chap you were relieving on watch turned into the bunk you just vacated, hence the term hot bunking. You couldn't possibly use the lavatories, the toilets. You couldn't use them when under attack or when you're liable to be detected because the discharge would bubble up to the surface and it might reveal you. Then after long submergence, you'd be short of oxygen, very short of oxygen. So short, in fact, after about 12 hours that you couldn't strike a match to light your cigarette, which by then you might desperately need.
Water was vaporized in a still, but only enough to supply the batteries or for drinking. You removed the worst of the grease with gasoline, using a tiny ration of water to clean your face and hands.
You never undressed at sea. You remained in the same clothes all the time. And that was because you had to go to the surface at any moment. You might have to go to the bridge at any moment. You might have to go to action stations at any moment. And I think what it did was to help bond even further a crew which became an absolutely solid team.
Close living conditions do have the effect of ridding you of the barriers between officers and men. In the wardroom, you're not shut away. Anybody can look in. The men see that you're all doing the same thing as they do. And in fact, in the tropics, you're all dressed the same because you're probably all just wearing a towel around your middle because it's so damn hot that you can't wear anything else. So there's nothing to judge people by except who they are, what sort of people they are.
The relationship between me and my men was one of complete confidence. Both sides, both ways.
U-boat ace Otto Kretschmer was a household name in Germany in 1940. In 18 months, his U-99 sank more than 300,000 tons of Allied shipping.
I knew, and I think everybody else of the crew also knew, that if one of us failed, it could mean the end of the whole submarine and its crew. And so it was a matter of solidarity of all of us. Captain, officers, petty officers, men. It was a band of brothers, really.
Admiral Horst von Schröder has traveled from Hamburg to visit his wartime commander and close friend, Captain Reinhard Hardegen. More than 50 years ago, they served many patrols together on U-123.
Oh, da bin ich. Jawohl. Danke. Danke.
When I was commander of Submarine 123, Admiral von Schröder, he was my watch officer, and he made all the patrols I made with 123, and he was a marvelous watch officer for me.
Hardegen and the U-boat arm were commanded by a veteran submariner of World War I. Admiral Karl Dönitz had developed a submarine strategy for which the Allies and even the Germans were not prepared. He also earned the admiration and respect of his men.
Admiral Dönitz, he had a very high personality, and he was like a father to all submariners. And he was one of the best troop leaders we had in the whole war.
Dönitz believed that with 300 submarines, Germany could throttle Great Britain. Events nearly proved him right. But at the outset, he had a mere 22 ocean-going U-boats. Try as he might, he could not make Hitler share his vision.
And that was a big failure Hitler made. I always said Hitler looked to the east, to the land. Hitler was no Navy officer. And I told him that when I was in the headquarters that it was a big failure because this war was a naval war. And the war only could be won or lost on the Atlantic and nothing else. And he laughed, he didn't believe it, but it was true.
Well, Hitler's ideas, as I know, when I was decorated by him and was his guest at his lunch, his ideas were that the submarine was the first line of defense. He was thinking in defense, more or less, and not in offense.
Anxious not to antagonize America, Hitler insisted on observing the prize regulations, preventing his U-boat commanders from sinking merchant ships without warning.
We didn't expect any prize regulations, really, because in World War I, the convoy system had been introduced, and that prize regulations with the convoy system wouldn't work.
Ships in convoy with armed escorts were far less vulnerable to submarine attack. Sinkings dropped dramatically when the convoy system was revived by the British. But Dönitz had devised a method for dealing with them.
And then was the aim to have a concentration of subs against a concentration of cargo ships, of ships in the convoy. So that was the thinking behind the wolf pack tactics.
Lick the U-boat and you beat the Hun.
On sighting a convoy, a U-boat commander would signal its position to headquarters. Other U-boats would be ordered to gather in the area before attacking together as a wolf pack, causing fearful destruction.
Is as dangerous to your home as a 1,000-pound bomb from the air.
Using his submarine's greater speed on the surface, Kretschmer preferred to attack at night, inventing new tactics.
The safest place for an attack was inside the convoy. And so I developed the tactics to penetrate the destroyer screen, to go inside the convoy, and there I was able to pick out the biggest ships, to be close to the target, so that I need not use more than one torpedo to sink them. And so at every patrol, I was more successful than other captains.
When Kretschmer and the other U-boat aces came home, they were welcomed as public heroes. They called it the Golden Time.
see, all they want to know our feelings. And it's very difficult to know 50 years afterwards our feelings. It was what we had to do and what we learned when we saw an enemy, a freighter, a destroyer, or an auxiliary cruiser. We had to attack the ship because our order was to sink ships. Not to kill men, but to sink ships.
I think that is a very important point, that in the Navy we were fighting against material and not against man.
More than 100,000 lives were lost in the destruction of more than 14 million tons of shipping by 1,100 U-boats in all. For the Wolfpack strategy to work, Dönitz depended upon having full details of each submarine's location.
For this information of his, it was necessary to make signals. And so the quality of the submarine, of stealth, invisibility, and silence was almost reduced to nil. Every submarine at sea is a unit of itself, and its captain must decide what to do. He cannot receive tactical orders to attack now or not now by a shore headquarters from a green base table.
But each time the U-boats communicated with Dönitz at headquarters, they were unknowingly betraying their own positions.
And the reason was that the British cracked our German naval cipher in Bletchley Park.
The High Command of the Armed Forces of the Navy would not acknowledge the fact that the enemy had broken the code. The result was that every signal for Operation Atlantic could be read at the same time by the enemy.
By cracking the Enigma code, the British could now pinpoint the U-boats. Convoys could avoid them, and the submarines became vulnerable to attack.
The real role of cipher breaking was really to localize the submarine contact. It meant that you could get your anti-submarine ships and your aircraft into the right area. Instead of hunting for needles in haystacks, you could really target your anti-submarine assets accurately. And that's why the Enigma code-breaking exercise was so crucial.
The battle became one of rival scientists as much as ships and submarines. Improvements in detection, destruction, and air cover devastated the U-boats. Of the 39,000 officers and men who put out to sea, almost 30,000 never returned.
Quiet, boys. Keep it quiet. Nice and quiet now.
The depth charge experience is something you have to feel to go through it. Imagine yourself in a big tin tank and some character hammering on it with a huge sledgehammer on the outside. First place, it shocks your eardrums. Second place, the whole thing is shivering like this. And third, you're scared because you're afraid that maybe the sea pressure will break through, and if water comes in, you're you've had it.
All hands full! Come out to 150 meters! Come out 150 meters!
One day we had depth charges, and I was sitting in the central room, and I took a book and did so as if I was reading in the book. And I was listening to the depth charges, and I said a little bit more starboard or port side and so on. And I thought, if I was reading in the book, the crew will think, oh, if the commander, the captain is reading in the book, it's not so very difficult. And then von Schröder came and said to me here, I had the book topside on. You remember this? He said, please, turn it over.
For God's sake!
I remember a time I actually thought I'd been killed. And this is quite a feeling. You say to yourself, gee whiz, am I dead? How come I'm still thinking about it? Because what happened was that one of our torpedoes had gone on a circle and it exploded right overhead. And there was a light bulb hanging down in front of my eyes, right about here, and it had been turned out by unscrewing. When that thing went off, the light bulb blew and shattered, and this great light flashed into my eyes. And there's a tremendous noise, and the whole ship just shuddered. And that's when I thought, this is it. I'm amazed. How does it feel? How come I can still feel? You know, and in about, well, I guess a quarter of a second, I realized that I was still alive and not dead.
Depth charges robbed Germany of her ace commanders. Kretschmer counts himself lucky to have escaped with his life.
The boat fell down like a stone. There was no propulsion anymore, no electric propulsion underwater, and as I found out later on the surface, no other propulsion by diesel engines. It was destroyed, and I had used all the remainder of the compressed air to get up to the surface. So the boat came up like a cork. For me, I had my full leather dress and also my peaked cap brought to the bridge, so that when I had to go into captivity, I was fully dressed. And remember, the boat stood on the stern, vertically on the stern. I was the last one on the bridge, and went down stern first, vertically.
U-99 was one of 784 U-boats sunk at sea. For those men who sank with their submarines, the experience was uniquely terrifying.
I was in the wardroom, as it were, over there at the time, decoding a signal, and suddenly this enormous bang forward.
Commander Teddy Young was one of the survivors of a collision with a ship. His submarine sank in 80 feet of water. He became separated from the others in the darkness.
When I turned round, I suddenly was in the control room, and there was nobody there. All the crew had gone into the engine room, and they'd shut their door and started doing their escape. So yeah, I thought I was all alone. And then I suddenly heard a voice over my head, and I looked up into the conning tower. They said, "Hello, Teddy, what are you doing down there?" So I said, "Any room up there for me?" And they said, "Well, we might just squeeze you in." So I went up, first returned said, here we go for survivors' leave. Pushed up the hatch, and the sea came tumbling in, and we just fought our way out. I think half the officers and half the men were lost altogether. And this includes 2 who were lost on the bridge, who drowned because they couldn't swim. In fact, the navigating officer who was with the captain, he had heavy sea boots on, and he swam for a bit, and then the boots were too heavy, and he just sank underwater.
U.S. That's Barbell. Sunfight, aerial bomb, all hands lost.
The submarine was arguably the deciding factor in every maritime theater of war. Far from the battle for the Atlantic, America's submariners took pride in placing themselves in harm's way.
I'm speaking, of course, to a very distinctive group of those men, an exclusive community of heroes who endured, who thrived on extraordinary dangers and privations, who sought out a life at the very edge of human endurance and ability. They were the men, all of them volunteers, who took on both the sea and the enemy in America's submarines during World War II. The story of the submarine in the Pacific is one without any parallel. It began here, of course, on a Sunday morning 50 years ago.
This morning, a severe bombing of Pearl Harbor by enemy planes, undoubtedly Japanese. It is no joke, it is a real war.
For all the terrible devastation wreaked by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor, the Japanese did not get at what arguably became the crucial type of vessel in the Pacific. They did not strike at the submarines.
The Japanese failed to grasp the tactical purpose of the submarine. They wasted them as transport and supply vessels, carrying munitions, seaplanes, and midget submarines. Even with the advantage of surprise, none of the midgets launched at Pearl Harbor was to survive the day. The job of a submarine is to attack. The Germans knew this, as did the Americans, but at the outset, they had problems.
Immediately after Pearl Harbor, the Pacific submarine crews do not appear to have been very well trained, and above all, they suffered from a faulty torpedo. And they were lucky, I think, that the Japanese anti-submarine effort was so weak that it gave them a chance not only to re-equip with new weapons, but to develop better tactical doctrines, train up a new generation of submarine crews and COs who could use the new submarines much more effectively.
The new submarines crisscrossed the Pacific, undeterred either by Japanese anti-submarine measures or the daily propaganda broadcasts of Tokyo Rose.
American submarines have headed west from Pearl Harbor. If American submariners are wise, you will turn back. Certain death awaits you over here. And now I'll play for you unfortunate Americans a popular recording.
Like Britain, Japan was an island nation, dependent on imports. Her supply lines were vulnerable, and the Americans went straight for the jugular.
Oil, rubber, coal, iron, rice. It was our job to see that most of that loot didn't get there.
We sank 2/3 of their merchant marine and 1/3 of their navy, considering that we were 2% of the navy. The results were phenomenal.
Find them, chase them, sink them.
We were just at submerged periscope depth, and they were coming at us. And our captain fired the stern tubes at him. Right, they called that down the throat shot. And we blew him out of the water. It was either him or us, one or the other.
Triumphant as they were in the Pacific, the Americans had learned a costly lesson about the vulnerability of their own merchant fleets in the Atlantic. Within days of Pearl Harbor, a handful of U-boats launched Operation Drumbeat off the East Coast. The Americans displayed complete ignorance of the hard-earned experience Britain had gained in anti-submarine strategy. A second golden time began for the Germans.
When I came to the United States, they had no exercise, and in the first time we were nearly laughing because it was like a deep peacetime.
Want those cargoes protected.
When we came near to New York, near Long Island, we saw all was in full light. We saw the hotels, we saw the motor cars and the lights on the road, and in the background we saw the red gloom of New York, of the million lights of New York.
Captain Harding got not only the Night Cross, but also the oak leaves to the Night Cross of Iron Cross after the second patrol to the U.S. coast. By sinking, I think, 10 or 11 ships on the last patrol. We were professional soldiers, and it was our duty to fight for our country.
The Japanese submarine force regarded attacks on merchant shipping as secondary, preferring naval targets, or worse, using their submarines in defense. Submarines remained Japan's single biggest failure, even the I-class, the largest in the world. The Japanese specialty, the midget, was also unsuccessful, though it was to symbolize the terror of Japan's threat to the whole Pacific. The two-man midgets brought the war into suburban backyards of Sydney, destroying the innocent belief that with distance went security. But an even smaller weapon of terror was to come. Born of the desperation of looming defeat, a suicide midget was devised, a torpedo driven by a man. They called them Kaitens. It meant the turn towards heaven, everlasting glory for the doomed pilots.
These Kaitens had no fire control equipment, but all they did was aim at the bow of a ship that's moving forward, go at full speed themselves until everything went blank. That was the tactic.
On the I-58, a submarine captained by Commander Hashimoto, a young Kaiten pilot wrote a letter just before his torpedo was launched into Guam.
The day of decisive action, together with 3 other men on board, has arrived. We are all well and in good spirits. The moon is pale and the stars sparse and distant. For the sake of our great country, we have come to the place appointed. Only 22 years of life, and it is now just like a dream. The meaning of life will be shown today. Great Japan is the land of the gods. Hereafter, no matter, there will be thousands and tens of thousands of boys. Let us get away from the petty affairs of this earthly and mundane life to the land where righteousness reigns, supreme and eternal.
Ironically, despite their fearsome speed and psychological threat, the Kite-10s were a military failure. Though dozens were launched, only 2 claimed definite sinkings. Other incidents remain the subject of speculation.
I believe that the Indianapolis sank so fast because she was hit by 3 Kite-10s.
Returning from secretly delivering parts for the Hiroshima bomb, the USS Indianapolis chanced upon Hashimoto's I-58. She became the largest U.S. ship sunk by submarine, and Hashimoto's only major kill.
I mean, he said he was so sure he would sink it that he didn't want to use Kite-10s. That is baloney. You see a big target, you use the best weapon you've got, and you don't say, oh, I can sink it, no problem. No way. You hope you can do it, and you do your best. So I have no doubt that he fired his Kite-10s.
I was probably within 50 feet of the ship. I hadn't gotten very far, and the ship was standing on its nose. And I watched it go till it was completely out of sight. And it just dropped like a rock. One of the propellers was still turning. And it dropped very fastly. Probably didn't take over 5 or 6 seconds for it to disappear the last 150, 200 feet of the ship.
Great Japan is determined to win. The decisive battle has sprung onto the enemy's territory. May the spirits of the departed in heaven witness our fight to the bitter end.
American submariners shut the door on Japan. The war against Japan was won. Japan was finished before those 2 terrible atomic weapons were dropped upon the Japanese islands.
I personally wish we had not dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The fact is, we really didn't need to. The Japanese were trying to surrender.
On the bomb which destroyed Hiroshima was scrawled, "A present for the souls of the Indianapolis crew."
I had 2 roommates at submarine school in 1942, and Mel Phillips, right here, I was lost on the Grayback, and I always come up when I come here and say a little prayer and remember Mel. And over here on the trigger, Johnny Sinkfish, and it's our legacy, hoping that your generation and succeeding generations won't forget people like this.
This is the Hilton. We were more like Motel 6. Clean as a whistle.
Crew seems to be well-trained, happy and contented, and I know they're well-fed.
This thing makes so much water you could take a shower every 5 minutes. We had to sacrifice. When we were coming into port, we took a shower for the girls. That's about it.
What submarine I was on? The USS Hunter. One of the highest decorated skippers we had, too. We had the Congressional Medal of Honor, 4 Navy Crosses, Distinguished Service Cross from MacArthur. They're using his tactics today in some of their submarine exercises. He was a good boy. But you got to remember, too, we were all kids. What, 19, 18, 19? That's all we were. But I'd do it all over again. Take care.
Thank you.